we had way more time at the very end. I was like, oh, wow, we're wrapped up.
Awesome. And we're live. Just gonna wait a few seconds for more people to come in. I see a lot of people still in the waiting room. Gonna give it like 10 seconds, maybe 10, 15 seconds.
Sure.
And then we will officially get started. Hi, everyone. If you're here and you can hear us and you're excited, throw it in the chat. It's always a good idea. And then we can say hi as well. I'll do that right away. Hi. I don't know what that icon is, but hello. Hi, Joe. Hi, Rhea. Okay, so as more and more people are entering, let's just get started. Hey, Avi. So welcome, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar called Digital-Led CS from Segmentation to Channel Strategy. Quite a lot, and we also have quite a packed agenda, hence I want to get started as quickly as possible. I'm joined today by Looker's Brian LaFaille. For some of you, this might be a deja vu, not really sure which accent to choose there. And you wouldn't be wrong either, because we actually did a similar webinar, I think in May last year. So this is very much an encore, and we're going to try and see if we can reach the quality level of that webinar. But for those that haven't seen that or that don't know Brian, maybe Brian, it's good that you briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah. So first off, thank you to everybody who's tuning in for maybe even a second time. If you're here for the first time, I would recommend maybe going back to the first session and giving that a listen. But yeah, I was blown away that the talk, Remco, you and I had a couple months ago, it resonated with so many people, and it just kind of speaks to the demand and the thirst for this style of information, where everyone is trying to figure out their digitally led CS program and their digital success and all of that. And so I was blown away by the response. I was like, oh my God, like this is so incredible to have a community of people that are all trying to build this similar type of program. But yeah, so for those that weren't on the first webinar, just quick background about me. I've been in software and B2B SaaS for 15 plus years, and all of my positions have centered around the post-sales experience. I've run a support team, I've run an account management team, and then most recently built this customer success team at Looker from the ground up. So was the first customer success hire at Looker, got to build, grow, and shape the entire CS function and post-sales go-to-market. From about 2014 when I started all the way to 2019 when we were acquired by Google Cloud. And then since being acquired, I've kind of expanded my purview and moved away from necessarily like the day-to-day CSM management. I'd been doing that for a couple of years at that point, and moved over into scaling programs, which was an incredible opportunity for me to work on other products outside of Looker and start to integrate a little bit more deeply with the Google Cloud portfolio. And so what I focus on today is, all of the CS programs that we roll out to all of the SaaS products within the Google Cloud portfolio. And so that is, Apogee, Chronicle, Looker, and Workspace, and how we can scale our go-to-market through light touch and digital touch means. So it's been a really fun experience to be with Looker and go through the acquisition and the integration and go with this, hyper-scaling team into a much larger organization. So it's been really fun.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. You've sort of become, at least I think, the embodiment of this sort of digital CS movement. Because I've seen so many presentations by you about this as well. I know you're also still presenting about this in educational sort of like sessions. So you've made it your mission to sort of own the narrative and everything there. So that's super cool. I've actually also been super excited about doing a second version of this webinar because, like what you said, the response to the last one was awesome. And also the very reason that we're now doing an encore is actually a LinkedIn thread. So someone from the customer success community on LinkedIn who basically tagged us in a post and was like, when's the second version happening? Why hasn't it happened yet? And we finally stopped being lazy and put the second version on the calendar. So I think that's
I'm so glad. And that just speaks to the CS community, which I think is incredible, right? Everybody's trying to learn, everybody's trying to grow. And often, even Salesforce, which is, the grandfather of SaaS and customer success, even they are rethinking their digital success strategy as they scale, right? And so, there's no one right way to do this. And so there's this massive maturation that's happening in the SaaS space, where a lot of these companies are getting to 100 million, 200 million, 50 million in ARR, and they're realizing they can't just scale with CSMs anymore. How do I do this? And everybody's kind of looking to their peers to say, well, how's Atlassian done it? How's Zoom done it? How's Slack done it? And there's no one right answer. And so, again, very, very similar to setting up a CS go-to-market. It's taking some components of, some elements of maybe what you've seen from similar type companies, and then trying to match that with, your stage of company and what you think is going to work best for your business.
Yeah. I've heard rumors that durable growth will be the next sort of like buzz phrase in SaaS.
So
I don't know if that's late or early, but I don't know.
I think that's a good call out, right? I think that we are seeing maybe a resetting of how SaaS companies are going to be valued in the public markets in particular. And where previously there's been this emphasis on grow, profitability can come later. If you actually look at the W Cloud Index, which is like it takes all the Bessemer SaaS stocks that they track and then puts it into an actual like exchange traded fund, an ETF. And if you look at that, like all of the gains that many of these SaaS companies have had over the last 2, 3, 4 years since the pandemic has started, it's all been wiped out. And all of those investors have now switched back over to more value-based, and they realize that, hey, look, I don't want to wait for 1, 2, 3, 4 years to see some sort of profitable, quarter from a SaaS company. I want to start seeing that today. And so, Remco, to your point, I think that, we're going to see a transition that the companies that are able to make, growth happen, but do so profitably and do so in maybe like a little bit of a lesser degree of growth, but it's more kind of durable and it's able to be, held up against the markets over time. I think that's what we're probably going to see. And so it puts an emphasis on how are you going to scale? How are you going to do so profitably? How are you going to do so with more efficient resources? And so it's something that I'm very interested to see how the markets play out in the next 12 months.
Agreed. Yeah, same. And luckily, the topic that we're covering today is also going to play or already playing a very, very big role into that. So I think it's time to get started. So maybe 2 things before we kick off. So the first one is, yes, this webinar is recorded. We will also make sure to actually send you the recording shortly after we conclude our session today. So while note taking is always appreciated, and I cannot say that you're wrong for taking any notes, I will too, but you can also binge watch the video later if you don't feel like it right now. And then secondly, we will try to cover 5 areas of digital-led CS, or at least 5 important topics that we think are important for digital-led CS, which are segmentation, transitioning, channels, results, and team. But we don't necessarily have to cover all 5. I mean, if you guys in the chat also have really great questions, and that is actually preferred for both Brian and me. So feel free to just throw them in the chat. We'll weave them into the conversation and see how far we will get. Housekeeping done. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. I know. Okay, let's start off with segmentation. So very, very brief intro. We also talked about segmentation the last time we did a webinar about digital CS. And I think what we mostly talked about is segmentation in the sense of how big are these accounts, how much ARR do they represent in our CRM, and how basically can we get started making a small selection of what we would consider our accounts that are ready for a digital approach and accounts that are absolutely still something that you have to have a named CSM or at least like a one-on-one approach for. So I think we've covered that. We can still touch on it briefly, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. Instead, I think for now, I would like to sort of ask you if there are any behaviors or sort of data, KPIs, leading indicators that you've been looking at Google or Looker that indicate whether or not someone could be ready for a digital approach or more suited for a digital approach instead of just someone that you start off with one-on-one CSM. And then maybe as a secondary question also, when do you actually see those behaviors happen? So is this something that you could, for example, already get as feedback from your sales team as soon as the deal closes? Like, yeah, okay, these are ready for a digital approach already because they know what they're doing. Yeah, a lot.
That's a lot, but we're gonna try to tackle as much as we can in that question, Remco. But I think that segmentation, it really is one of the foundational layers for scale, right? If you think about segmentation of your customer base, it's one of the first ways that a customer success team is specializing. And you're starting to think about, hey, I've got like, larger customers and maybe middle customers and some smaller customers. And when many CS teams kind of start out, they often align to a sales organization, right? It makes sense. Hey, I'm going to align to sales. There's some pros to that, right? So you have strong alignment and clear accountability across sales and CS. So you might segment based on ARR, let's say, for instance. And you might say, hey, the customers that are spending the most, we need to make sure that we protect them and grow them. So we're going to, put them with the CSM in their name portfolio. That's the approach that we took. So that's not a bad thing to do. There are certainly some pros. It's very easy. It's very quantifiable. The dollar amount, like as soon as the deal closes, you can plan for it. So you can look at forecasted pipeline. So there's some benefits to that, right? But what we noticed over time is that, a couple of things broke down for us when we started to use that at scale. And one of the first things is that we noticed that there were opportunities where there were high growth accounts that, maybe only had just like a small license scope. And if I can give you an example, the example I like to give is, when we were at Looker and we were in the early days, IBM had signed a contract with us. But IBM, massive company, publicly traded, 100,000+ employees, I think. And they had signed a tiny little pilot worth $12,000. And, they weren't even on the radar to get a CSM. And it was instances like that we realized, look, if we just look at ARR, IBM would never get a CSM and they would just, go into this, digitally led program. Wait a minute, like they've got 100,000 employees. If this goes really, really well, there's a massive opportunity for us to expand in this account. And so one of the things that, when you asked kind of about data points, one of the things that we did is we actually came up with, a model that looks at both the ARR, so how much they're spending currently, which is like an evaluation of, what's the spend today. And then we looked at the number of employees, and we look at the number of employees within that company as what's the growth opportunity. So as a very simple framework, we gave a point system and we said, you get 1 point for every $10,000 of ARR. You also get 1 point for every 1,000 employees. And, based on this scaling system of points, we were able to assign, based on the current spend and the growth opportunity. Now that worked for us, but, they might not work for other companies. If employees, perhaps, if I'm, for instance, Twilio, and like I'm not used as, by end users, well, employees might not be the right metric. But I would ask people, what is something that you can stand up that might help standardize what customers might get a CSM and who's a good candidate for digital success. So that's kind of the first thing. And once we had this kind of point system in place, we grouped all of our customers. So we scored them, we grouped them, we bucketed them, and we said, look, the top, 1 to 2% that are scoring, hundreds of points, natural candidates for CSMs. But the ones in like the middle and the lower tier, these are ones that, are either low spending or they have a decently high contract, but the number of employees that they have at the company is fairly low. And we're like, wow, like we can go and start to, identify those customers as ones that might be good candidates for digital success. And so that's how we started to introduce more programmatic elements into segmentation. One, by actually having this scoring mechanism where we could standardize with this. And further, when we actually talked to sales and professional services and we aligned on this approach, they totally got it. They were like, yeah, I want a CSM on that IBM deal. So, we were missing that before. And so by introducing the point system, publishing that with our sales and professional services and support counterparts, and making sure that we were all really aligned, helped as a baseline for us to say, hey, here's how we're going about scoring our customers. Customers that score above X are, good candidates for a CSM. Candidates that, score under a certain level, potentially will go into digital success. I also want to say, I'm saying like potential candidates, and there's a reason for that language. This also is just a starting point, right? So if there is some sort of customer that scores below the threshold, but, the sales rep comes to us or the sales manager comes to us and wants to have a conversation about, hey, I know they don't have that many employees and they're not spending a ton, but I know that they actually are going to, go on to, acquire this other company in the next 6 months. it's a good opportunity. Let's keep a CSM on them, and we can evaluate it a little bit later. So the point system does help us, but it helps guide the conversation in a more data-driven way. And that's what we really are trying to do when it comes to scale, is how can we assign quantitative measures to some of the scaling elements.
Yeah, I love that. There's actually a good follow-up question by TJ in the chat is, how do you keep a system like this updated? Because especially in SaaS, right? Companies can have 15 employees day one, and then on day 17, they all of a sudden have 200 because they just raised a boatload of money. And then also, by the way, you probably need to look at your contract again because they're probably paying too little. But how do you keep a system like this updated, or how often do you do that?
Just a tactical perspective. We do quarterly batch updates, but you can use a system such as Clearbit or one of the data entry tools that comes with a plugin into LinkedIn. So it'll go in it'll identify the company, so it knows hey, Uber has 1,000 employees as of this date. We're going to pull that from LinkedIn, and then we're going to shove it into your Salesforce. Perfect, because now it's accessible, and then it will revisit in a quarter. And it's like, oh, well, Uber's grown to 4,000 employees. Okay, so now we reevaluate the point system. But that's one of those things. There are tools out there that can help you gather that information and make it up to date. Again, it's all going to vary. Some high growth technology companies might add 1,000 employees in a quarter. I've seen it happen. But very often the numbers are fairly low in terms of actual changes quarter on quarter. And so generally they tend to stay in the same kind of point range.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And as you mentioned, it's a starting point, right? So I actually think this is quite a thorough starting point because you're looking at it from different angles. What I also like about this as a starting point is that it doesn't necessarily only say, okay, look, the smallest amount of employees or the smallest number in terms of dollar ARR in our system is not suitable for a CSM. This actually opens up a window to look at an account and figure out whether or not it actually has growth potential or not. And I think that's probably, sorry, it's my son coughing in the background. I think that's probably also a skill that you need to have, is basically you need to be able, and IBM is probably a little bit easier, but you need to be able to look at IBM, see the 12 people that currently are, or the 12 licenses that they have or something else, or 12K pilots, I don't necessarily remember. And then also be able to figure out from day one, okay, this has growth potential. We can actually grow a lot.
Yeah. And I am seeing actually, Remco, one of the questions that come in from Zoe. So what happens in the event a customer decreases their ARR or company size? So again, great question, but we do think of these things as, look, customers can update their contracts on an annual basis, right? So when they come for renewal, that's the opportunity. We do very few intra-contract reductions or things like that. It needs to happen, or we push our customers to happen at renewal time. But it's also why we have a renewals team to say, are you set up for the next year in terms of growth and things like that? We want to make sure that you're ready for the next year's amount of, licenses. So that number is not changing very frequently, right? So if they reduce licenses, it would happen once, maybe twice a year, right? The employees is what changes, and we update that quarterly, right? And we feel like it's a more slow changing metric. Because again, if you're only getting 1 point for every 1,000 employees. So in order for a company to move in the middle of a year, they would have to add 1,000 additional employees. And so we error, and if you look at the weighting mechanism, we error more on ARR. However, in the case of somebody like a Google, which has 150,000 employees, they're going to get 150 points in our system just on employees, regardless of what they spend. And so it does anchor a little bit more around enterprise and trying to figure out. Now, we also scored the entire customer base because we didn't even know what a good threshold would be to cut off for named CSM, because we had never done this exercise before. So instead of saying, oh, you need 25 points to get a CSM, we actually looked at every customer and stack ranked them and then say, hey, what are some of the natural cutoff points that we looked at? And I think that can help in a more programmatic way that removes some bias, can start a conversation with your sales team and your professional services team, and it can help standardize on some of these opportunities so that you're not having these lost ops for growth like an IBM.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that. So I think also maybe this is a good segue, because the second part of Zoe's question is also, how do you remove CS support, or at least take a CSM away, I guess, without damaging the relationship. So I'll just very briefly give you the opportunity to talk about graduation here, because I know it was the hit of the last webinar. So let's just get it out of the way.
Yeah. So a great part of the second question, which is, look, you've now provided, you've stack ranked all of your customers, you have good candidates, right? Now, for us within Looker, we did this exercise while these customers were still in a named CSM's portfolio, right? So we wanted to make sure they still had their CSM, right? And we grew our customer base and our CSM approach such that, look, we added more CSMs and we added more accounts to those CSMs to be able to support this growing customer base. So at one point in time, every customer totally in the hundreds had a CSM. And we realized that model was going to break. And so we started to do some analysis behind the scenes, one of which was this segmentation analysis. Where do people fall on this point spectrum? Where are the natural cutoff points that we can align with sales of, hey, who goes to what customer? But then one of the next exercises, okay, well, we've identified some of the customers that might be good candidates. How do we move them? And it really comes down to 4 areas. And I want to make sure I check my notes here because this is kind of something that I thought about a lot. One is your change and your migration of customers from a CSM's portfolio into a pooled model should look more like a gradient with accounts being added over time, as opposed to a black and white mass migration. We're going to move 500 accounts on this one day. Do not do that. And I'll tell you why in a moment. The second is positioning matters. And Remco, that's where, this whole notion of graduation comes in. And when we actually position things to our customers and to our internal stakeholders, so sales, professional services, support, et cetera, we wanted to make sure that it was a very positive experience for both the customer and internally. We're not ripping away a CSM. We've done everything that we can in partnership with this customer to get them to high levels of maturity and use and adoption. They don't need us anymore. They've graduated, right? Like we don't need to be here. And so I think that the actual messaging and the language you use to both your customers and internal stakeholders is really critical and key. And we can also dig into that in a little bit in a moment. The third is you need to have value confirmation. Before moving this customer over, you need to make sure that this customer is a good candidate. The last thing you want to do is go and create this program. You have high hopes for this program succeeding. You move over, 200, 300 accounts, in the first quarter, and lo and behold, many of those customers end up churning. Not a good move, not a good look. It's not good for the customer. And so you really want to make sure that you've got points of validation, both from the CSM and from the customer in them renewing. Like the renewal is the biggest vote of like value confirmation you really can receive.
Yeah, and so is value confirmation a threshold for you? So do you have like a minimal number thing, I don't know, adoption, license utilization kind of metrics that they need to achieve in order to actually, sort of have value confirmation? Yeah,
it's an exercise that's done by our CSMs. And, the CSM at that point in time, they said, look, like, I think based on this point scoring, we gave that information to the CSMs. We say, look, we think that these customers are probably good candidates to move to the pool, but it's going to require your validations that we set them up on the right foot. And, that required the CSM looking at, Remco, as you mentioned, all of the data that we have about our customers. What was their NPS look like? Are they using support, which for us is actually a good thing. So like we looked at their support CSAT. We looked at the number of outstanding feature requests and bugs. We looked at all the different things that might justify, is this customer really solid, right? The point saying that they might be a good candidate, but we haven't heard from them in 6 months and there's no champion there. Ooh, like maybe that's not the right candidate to actually. So we did this validation exercise and it was a full-on success plan audit of customers that was going to go into the pool. And by doing so, it's a great checkpoint to really take stock of like, how are these customers really doing and what are the key risks? And the net benefit to the CSM is like, hey, I want to do this thing because if I do this and they meet these criteria, they're out of my portfolio. I can focus on these other accounts that I want to be working on anyway. And so there's kind of a mutual benefit for both the customer to mitigate risk and understand what are those value checkpoints and if they're high, medium, low, if there's some sort of risk. And if there's something is identified, we don't push it. We say, okay, that's fine. Let's wait till the next renewal. We'll keep them in your portfolio. And, we can start to work on, but I think that validation exercise is good regardless, because it forces your CSMs to think critically of what are some of the areas this customer might have risk at a renewal. And, then at that point, if they weren't a good candidate for the pool, well, then obviously then we just put them on a risk mitigation plan. And we said, well, then we got to get these guys back to healthy. Yeah. So, I mean, it was a fairly manual exercise, but again, at the point when we did this, we were only about 1,000 customers with about, I think we maybe had 18 to 20 CSMs at that point. And so you were able to split up the work, and people did this validation. And then we started to say, okay, we've got this list of candidates. Now we can start moving them in batch by batch, right? And Remco, the final thing, digital success.
Point 4, sorry, I interrupted you.
Point four, and that is digital success, right? If you decide to make a move like this and you do not have the supporting digital success programs or digital channels that allow these types of customers to get value from you and have some sort of open communication channel, if you just dump them into this pool and you say, okay, maybe there's like 2 light touch CSMs that are responsible for 2,000 customers, I'm not a fan of that working. I've not seen it work. But rather, if you really spend some time focusing on, hey, what are the key behaviors we need to drive to mitigate risk and drive expansion and renewals, and focus on the digital channel strategy of, hey, what email communication am I going to set out? What in-app messaging are we going to do? Things like that you can start to build ahead of time, so that when these customers actually do start moving over into the pool, they've got the certification programs, they've got the e-learning journeys, they've got the YouTube channels and videos, they've got the docs and the resources. And so, I think that it's unwise to move a whole set of customers over without simultaneously developing those digital channels, which allow these customers to get more self-service value from your company.
Yeah. So I really want to get into that. Maybe before we do, so this is a very nice segue, but I'll segue the segue. So before we do, I want to very briefly answer the question that Eric has asked in the chat. So he's asking, how would you manage revenue, ownership or retention during the onboarding and implementation stage within the digital segment, knowing that their focus is solely on time to value? I think we sort of answered it, because I think you mentioned that the ultimate proof point of value confirmation is the renewal. But I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah. So what's interesting during onboarding and implementation, right? When we have sales, we've qualified the lead. We know that they're a good customer. We've got a sales engineer that's kind of qualified, and they're actually doing proactive risk mitigation. So they've been trained on all of the components of our risk management framework. They're saying, hey, we just closed this deal, but to be honest, the CEO is a fan of Tableau, so watch out. That's the kind of thing that they're doing early on in the life cycle. And so that which is great. It helps inform our professional services team, and that also goes into the calculation of, hey, should we have a CSM that might have a closer look at one of these customers that may carry signs of risk, right? But there are other departments that are doing the actual implementation, and we've actually scaled out our whole partner network to do a lot of the external implementations of Looker. And so they are the ones focusing on time to value. What we are looking at are all of the metrics associated with the customer behaviors that we would expect coming out of an implementation. So as a CS organization, we're seeing this customer come through. We notice that it's going to one of our partners, say Bytecode, and they are doing the work with Bytecode. There are partner managers that are kind of looking at that and making sure that the partner is actually delivering on time and under budget and things like that. But what we are looking at the CS team is, is this customer connecting their database? Are they actually rolling out the user authentication features? Have they set up permissions for their users? We're looking at all these things behind the scenes to understand, coming out of this, is this one that we need to prioritize, that we should focus on? Or do we feel like they've got enough traction that, we can let them kind of run naturally with little interference?
Yeah. So is this actually a part of the handover from the partner that's doing the implementation? So do they already feed you information that you require to actually figure out whether or not they can go into a pooled system immediately, or need a one-on-one CSM a little bit longer?
So our customer engineers, our customer engineers do that. And then the actual implementation is a mixture of both partner and internal professional services folks.
Yeah.
And I would say that over time, it was, in the early days, it was way more internal employees that were doing these implementations. Over time, I want to say it's something like 70 to 80% plus are being done through partners. And so we have really strong partner relationships.
Yeah.
We almost think of them as our extended, team in some ways. And so, some of the CS leaders will meet with some of the partner managers to be able to make sure that we're providing them all the information. We're looking at all the same metrics. We're understanding what are the customers that are struggling in their implementations and things like that. But yeah, it's a really good partnership. But we only got there over time by really developing this very programmatic motion within our own internal professional services org, and then starting to train our partners on how we onboard customers.
Yeah. I like it. It's also a story of scale, I guess. Also helps you scale a lot faster. Yeah. So if everyone remembers the last segue, that was a beautiful segue into channels. We're taking that segue now, or that route.
Yes.
So when we first started talking before the first webinar that we did about digital CS, what I always remember is that you showed me this sheet, and there was a sheet, and that was your channel plan, and you had worked out like what channels are coming in where across the journey, what channels do you actually need, which need focus for the next year, etc. So maybe you can take us through your current channel plan, or what channels you're using for your digital strategy, and whether or not anything's still missing.
Yeah. So when we thought about our digital CS program, we asked ourselves, one, we want to be as data driven as possible, and knowing that we want to be data driven, we could have just gone and built some campaigns and hope for the best in terms of open rates and click-through rates and very little targeting and things like that. And we could have just kind of thrown something at the wall and seen what sticks. We really decided, though, that if we want this to be valuable to customers, we needed to take a more data-driven approach and understand what are the valuable characteristics they need to be exhibiting in the product in order to get value. And so that exercise is what drove, and we call it the customer behavior mapping exercise. That is what drove all of the channels that we built. And initially we started with some of the more routine channels. So you can expect email campaigns, but email campaigns are, in some ways, I've been signed on with some other SaaS products, right? And they send you like a welcome email, and then you don't hear from them again. And maybe it's just like a one-time thing. I've seen other, email campaigns that are very robust. I give kudos to Atlassian for doing this well. However, it might not be targeted for my persona or what I need in that moment. And so we really wanted to make sure that we were balancing, is this message going to be the right person for the right person at the right time? And is it going to drive the right behavior? And that was like our goal with all of the campaigns. And so we started with one of the more natural ones, which is email, but by actually focusing on persona-based campaigns that were time-bound, meant to drive a specific behavior that we knew led to value for the customer, but also led to retention and expansion on our side. We wanted to make sure that these were hyper-focused in establishing value. And now, even with those campaigns, we do generally like marketing email blasts, for maybe our user conference like once a year. And those email campaigns are good, but they get open rates in the 30 to 35% range, and a click-through rate of maybe 1 to 2%, right? When we actually went very data-driven, persona-based, time-bound, driving these, we're seeing 60 to 70% open rates and 10 to 20% click-through rates. And so it's pretty, while that's, still fairly low, that's very good for email marketing standards. And so, by actually leaning into, having more hyper focus, it's really helped us. Now, then we said, okay, we've got the very basics. We know that we can get messaging out. We've got a one-way communication to get customers the comms that they need throughout the life cycle, the first 6 months. And then we said, what else can we do? And we actually asked our customers, and we started to do some interviews with these, and they said, oh, we want to do video stuff next. And we said, okay. So we decided to stand up a more, this is a more product-oriented webinar that focuses on onboarding, best practices, tips and tricks, adoption and change management strategies. These are all things that are CS-oriented, but we wanted to have a more scalable way to deliver this content that felt more, human to human. Right? Because we've got live Q&A, we're able to present something, have a discussion with customers, answer live Q&A. And so that was a very natural next step. And then we said, okay, where else should we be? And we really said, well, a lot of our users are actually in the product, and that's where they need help. And so we said, okay, let's go in product. So, between myself and customer marketing and a partner in product, we brought on Pendo to roll out these in-app guides. And we said, look, for new users that get dropped into a Looker instance, how can we guide them through the journey? And throughout every one of these different digital channels, we're focusing on the same key behaviors. So, you might imagine the experience for an admin or a developer being, hey, we know that you need to connect your database in the first month. And they might get an email about that. And if they choose to open that or not, doesn't matter, because they also will get a notification in the app while they're working and say like, hey, like here's the details and the instructions. We noticed you haven't connected your database yet. Here are the instructions to do so. And we offer, hey, here's a webinar that you can attend on this exact topic. And by offering these both like pull and push type digital success channels, you're able to really, offer the customer or the user choice as to what they want to engage with. And if they don't want to attend the webinar, that's fine. They're still going to get those types of comms by either email or in-app or something like that. We also developed like online certification programs and an e-learning platform, which is kind of unique to Looker, called Looker Connect. And this is a hybrid of docs and resources and knowledge management and videos, all wrapped up into one that is meant to guide a user through their learning journey based on persona. So if you're an admin, you're going to have a certain set of lessons that you need to complete over time. If you're a business user that just wants to look at, how do I refresh a dashboard? But all of these things are meant to be very personalized to the user and focus on the persona. And so those are the things that we're looking at today. We are evaluating how we do more with data. And so we are considering as a next step, how do we really drive some sort of digital analytics experience that gets more gamification data out to our customers about their levels of adoption and their support cases and their benchmarks against others. And we've started to run some pilots. Cast App is an example of a company who's like early in the space.
Awesome.
But it really is one of those things that, I think that we as a society are used to this vast amount of data being pushed at us all the time. If you're on Instagram, you can see how much, traction your post gets. If you're on Fitbit, I get like a weekly recap off of like in my email of like how many steps I've taken and all these things. Yeah. Spotify does their year in review where they send out all of your listening trends and things like that. So we're getting more conditioned to be, around these data points. It's not, I think that there's a certain level of like data literacy that has happened across society when like, oh yeah, I see like the percentages and the number of steps taken and the calories burned. Oh yeah, I totally get what you mean by that. And if you were to ask society about this, 20, 30, 40 years ago, when the only access people had to data was maybe Excel, it might not resonate. But today, like that's kind of what the user expects. And so we're trying to figure out how we can deliver more interactive insights that can allow for benchmarking, competitive analysis, and other features that maybe your competitors or your peers are using. And do so in a very kind of beautiful and interactive way. And so that's one of the things that we're kind of evaluating next. It's in kind of like the development phase and trial and error, but it's something we're looking at.
I also almost feel like this is also kind of a transparency thing in a way, because it also, just look at health scores, for example, right? We used to go into a QBR or something else with the customer and then basically have a story prepared because we think they're not doing well. But that's completely based on a health score that's only visible to the CSM. That's actually prepping the QBR and based on certain like data points that are often vendor-based data points, but that doesn't really matter. But the customer doesn't really know and has no way to actually see how he or she is doing.
If I could have a magic wand for customer success in the whole industry, we would be vastly more transparent with our customers with the data that we have about them. I, as a CSM and as a CS leader within Looker, I would take our customer lookup, all of the data that we have about that particular customer from Zendesk and Salesforce and all these things. And we would look at it and be like, okay, can we share this with a customer? And yeah, we did. I would bring that up in the meeting because I wanted them to see how we are looking at them and agree on some of the metrics that we should align on. And we say, look, here's what I'm looking at. When I look at your adoption, I'm looking at this. When I'm looking at your query performance, I'm looking at this. And, can we agree that this is something that we should prioritize in improving for, your company? Yeah. And, I think that we have this hesitancy in the industry to be very transparent with our customers. But, again, I think that the rest of all of society is being used to being fed all of these insights and this data. Why aren't we being more transparent? I think that there is one big change that is happening across customer success, and that is this notion of, the consumption-based products, product-led growth and consumption-based products, because in that world, you have to be transparent with your customers about how much you're using, how much you're billing, and we're not trying to hide seats or permissions or things like that. It's very transparent to both the customer and the company. And I think that that's a net positive because it provides this level of accountability for both the CS department and the customer, where you can both agree and look at the same information. So that I hope that we move more in that direction, and I think we're on a good path. But sharing more data has always led to interesting and more dynamic conversations with customers by being able to point to more insights that we're collecting about them.
I think that makes total sense. I also think that we have to head that way and we've been talking about expansion being super important for years now and keeping customers in and instead of trying to acquire even more. I think this is the most logical thing to actually do if you're looking to grow your accounts instead of actually only retain them or get new ones. Because you can't grow your accounts to a made up number that you just came up with because you think a company needs to use 20 licenses instead of 10 that they have right now because they're too big for the 10 licenses. That doesn't work anymore.
I think that there's two things that come to mind in this new world that are of very clear interest, and I'm watching with a lot of passion right now. And that is, this consumption metric that increases accountability and transparency. And I think that's a net positive. The second thing that I'm watching of great interest are the CS departments that support a consumption-based product. And what I mean by that is with this improved transparency and access to data, it puts a lot of onus and work on the CS team to make sure that they are getting the value expected. So let me give you an example. I think of the Slack customer success team as one of the more robust that I've seen in the market, in the world, perhaps. And the reason being is that they have a very interesting billing model. They are on a fair billing policy. So you have to have active usage in the product in order to get billed. Now think about that. That means that the work then goes on the CSM and that's the whole CS leader and the whole post-sales function, because if they're not doing their job well and they're not held to account, the users don't get used, they don't log in, and therefore they can't bill. And same way with Google Cloud. With Google Cloud, we've got a consumption-based product. Sure, a company might sign on, to spend $100 million over the course of a couple of years, but we can only bill them and recognize that revenue if it's consumed, if it's used. So it puts the work on that CS team. So I think it requires that the CS teams get up-leveled and upskilled to really hone in on driving value and consumption and usage of the product. But you can do so in partnership with the customer and both be looking at the same metrics. So I'm very encouraged by that direction. And I think that's one of the things that'll help us scale is how do we be more transparent with our customers? And that might even mitigate other things that we hadn't even thought of. For instance, if we're putting out the number of users that a customer is using, does that cut down on the number of billing questions that we get? Because we're proactively sending them that, every month. And so, there might be some tangential benefits we haven't yet thought of, but I'm encouraged by that direction.
Yeah, I can imagine. Also, maybe one small train of thought there is, so what if that puts a lot of pressure on the CSM to actually make sure that they're doing their job well and to make sure that the customer is actually consuming what they're trying to be paying for, how does it impact your digital program then? So what part of the CSM's responsibility to actually make sure that they make money are they going to offload to a more automated digital program?
I would say that it puts, and this is where I come back to the customer behavior mapping exercise, it forces your CSMs and your entire CS function, both digitally led, light touch, and high touch, all to be very data driven so that they know when I'm interacting with an account or when we're sending an email campaign or when we're running this webinar or when I'm doing this light touch, like parachute burst engagement, it is going to drive high level of impact that we know leads to value, leads to adoption, leads to retention and expansion. And it forces you to really think critically about what are those behaviors? What are the things that we really need to hone in on so that we're not wasting our cycles just spending time on a weekly call with the customer where you maybe talk about some bugs or feature requests. I think that model needs to change and adapt and say, hey, if a customer wants to meet weekly, let's make it weekly around a topic that is going to add value, right? And so let's make it a very like workshop oriented discussion or some sort of, enablement or something that's going to drive the thing forward. Having a weekly meeting just to have a weekly meeting, I think that model may be on the way out. And instead, I think that what we've seen, at least with our customer base, when we've been very transparent with them about either these burst engagements or what accelerator we're going to run, or even what behavior we would expect that they would get out of this, they appreciate it. And so they're like, yes, I'm glad that you're coming in and helping me with this one thing. That was super valuable. Thank you. And instead of just, hey, let's meet, how are things going? I want to hear about your implementation. I saw you had some support tickets. Yeah. I think it forces your whole CS practice to be very hyper focused on like what is going to drive value for you. And I'm going to zoom in, zoom out. And ideally, if that can be done with digital success, fantastic. But if you need to layer on a light touch or a high touch motion, you have to be very targeted in your approach as well.
Yeah. Wasn't it you that called that a vendor-based journey or a vendor-based check-in or something like that? I don't know, like a checklist kind of thing. It's like, hey, we haven't spoken in 3 months. It's about time, right? How are you doing?
I would love to say death to the check-in call. I would love it, nothing more. So again, if I could wave my magic wand, there would be no check-in calls across customer success. Why? Because I think that although there can be good check-in calls around a certain project or some sort of milestone where we're trying to hold ourselves to account on, hey, we told ourselves that we were going to launch to this department on this date, and we're going to have 2 check-ins prior to that to make sure that there are no roadblocks or blockers or something like that. That might be a good check-in call. But just a check-in for the sake of check-in, I would love to retire the use of that word. And I would love to have instead, hey, CS workshop on a certain theme that is going to drive a certain behavior for you to get value. And we can actually codify our meetings a little bit better such that every touch point is adding value to the customer.
Yeah, no, I love that as well. I will sign wherever you need me to sign to make that.
We'll start a petition. We'll start a GoFundMe or something.
Yeah, spread it on LinkedIn. Let's see how far we get. Okay, I quickly want to pivot into results. So I think, and that's like a two-sided thing. So I definitely want to talk about what you should be looking at in terms of like, this is a good performing digital program or this is not a good performing digital program. Could be as simple as just like the customer staying and the digital program is helping us expand the account. Also fine, but very curious about your opinion there. But maybe to start with like a funny question. So do you think that a digital program will ever be able to outperform one-on-one CSM on an account?
I wish I could give a clear answer, but the way that we've structured our CS programs and the way that I think most companies structure their digitally led versus enterprise, named, it's never going to be an apples to apples comparison, unfortunately. Unless maybe there was some study that was done in an SMB segment where, hyper identical companies and things like that. Look, I don't think that CSMs are going away. I don't think that, digital success is going to take anybody's job. I think that there's going to be a happy harmony between the two and how you can work better together with the tools and things that are available via digital success channels and leveraging that to automate out some of the, comms that CSMs might do. They're very repetitive. And, and CSMs should learn to leverage that stuff and not fight it, but say, yeah, you're going to get this resource. And it's going to be this whole drip sequence of emails. If you have any questions, reach out to me. But I mean, this is really thorough. And so don't fight it, But I think that would be an interesting study. Maybe we should start to look at, CSM led versus non-CSM led accounts and like growth rates over time or something like that.
Honestly, I think it would be super interesting. Not necessarily because I think that one can replace the other, but I do think because to me, a study like this would be very behavior based. So it would be really based on who's actually the person that's using the product, that's getting all of these digital engagements, and maybe even their character partly, or how advanced they are in their career or at using your product. Because I can imagine that if you have a customer that's really self-sufficient and that loves to basically just go into Looker, go crazy, build a bunch of reports, get their data out, whatever answer they needed to get from all of the data, that having them do that by themselves and just helping them along that sort of self-sufficient journey could actually get them to go faster, or the account to progress faster, or maybe the account to expand faster in the end,
Right.
because they're doing it by themselves and it's actually like a logical journey for them.
Well, it's so funny you say that, Remco, because the name of our scaled program when we developed it, like many things at Looker, we've got like code names, right? So the code name for this scaled success and digital success program was the Velocity program. And that is because we noticed that there were some common characteristics about these customers that were good candidates. Most of them scored low on that point scale, right? Many of them were SMB, many of them were tech, many of them had experience in rolling Looker out previously. And we were like, what, mind blown. These are the perfect candidates for us to get out of their way. They've already done this before. They've rolled Looker out before. They know our docs. They know our resources. They've gone through the implementation. They know what to do here. We don't need to have a person there. Let's get out of their way so that they can move faster. And I think that is, as we like I said, we've got data surrounding us all the time. As we see, more customers that are being accustomed to providing the, tutorials, the webinars, the animated GIF support GIFs, the live chat, bots and things like that, that's becoming more commonplace. And so I think the customers are kind of getting used to just navigating those things. It's the same way that like when I call my bank, I just want to go through our automated system very naturally with like a natural language processing thing to get me to the thing that I wanted to go to. I don't necessarily need to have a conversation. Like I don't want to call them and go through like a phone bank. No, I don't want to do that. Just give me a good chatbot, and like I can navigate, sending a wire transfer, for instance.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I've also been sort of like, I don't know, culprit victim of this. If I, for example, I'm working in HubSpot for a full day and I'm trying to get this report about, I don't know, advertising or something like this, and through everything that I'm building, I found out that I cannot do one thing because I don't have the paid HubSpot. Basically, every feature in HubSpot is paid these days, so I don't have the paid HubSpot whatever feature that's going to cost me like $90 a month. I will probably be more inclined to buy it because I've already gone through this journey so far and I need this final data point to basically finish what I started. So probably if a CSM would have asked me in a QBR if I was going to buy this, I would be like, no, I don't need it. But because I got there myself, I would be more inclined to actually buy it. So I'm wondering if there is actually a way to scale that behavior for customers that are quite self-sufficient.
So I know that there's some like deep psychology behind this, but this whole notion, and there's even a movie about it, Inception, but actually planting thoughts that you come up with your own, there is the amount of validity that comes with that. And the amount that, when a sales rep is trying to convince you, you put up this wall in your head in terms of psychology and trying to say, no, I'm being sold to. But the second that you start to navigate around some docs and maybe it's some Reddit threads and then on YouTube and you're like doing some searching, you're like, maybe I do need this feature. Like, interesting. But you have to provide your customers even the ability to go into all these places, go to their docs, go to the learning resources, really get a grasp of what that product experience is going to be like. And then by then they're already planting that seed of thought in their own head. And then at that point, they're like, oh, I'm way more, open to some sort of expansion or, upsell or something like that. So there's a lot of weight there for sure.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I don't know, maybe in the future. As I think also because we're looking at B2B more from a B2C lens anyway, if you're looking at marketing and the way we provide support, and also the fact that we're actually speaking to humans instead of businesses. So this could be a similar thing to basically Instagram retargeting you with a shoe that you can't get out of your head for the next month, right? So really curious to see if priming these things will actually become a thing. Want to do some questions still. So we have Jan who's asking or saying, I love this vision, Brian. So there's a compliment. There you go. It sounds like you've had the time to roll this out and actually build it. This is a tough thing to accelerate, but early stage startups that are moving fast often have to. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think with a program like this, there's so much weight that's being carried and potentially ARR. So when we actually look at the distribution of our business, 98% of customers are in this pooled model. We did not start there, but 98% of customers. Now, 98% of customers also represents about 80% of revenue. So only the top 2% represent about 20% of revenue, right? So it's a pretty fairly like evenly distributed customer base, but the whole middle and long tail is in is in the scaled program. The recommendation is you kind of have to go slow to go fast. And, we ramped up this light touch motion over years, but you can start making some of the foundational, progress today to start saying, look, how might we score our customers? What is segmentation going to look like? Who are good candidates, right? So if you've got customers that are with CSMs already, who might be a good candidate to move over the pool? How are we going to start developing our digital channels? Take an audit of that, right? Do we have webinars? Do we have docs? Do we have learning material and contents? Do we have a YouTube channel? What about our social presence? Like all of these different things you can start to take stock of. And it doesn't need to be something that you do, all at once either. Maybe you lay out a vision saying that we're going to add one digital channel or evaluate one digital channel every quarter for the next year. And after the end of the year, you've got 4 new digital channels that you've rolled out. And one of the benefits is, as you're moving quickly, Jen, like I can imagine that like metrics are important to be able to prove impact. And so one of the things that will be beneficial is as you roll out one of these digital channels, you'll be able to see the webinar attendance or the community engagement or the views on the community posts or the reshares on your social things. And so you'll be able to see what works and what resonates for your customer base. It's not all going to be the same, right? What works for us may not work for somebody else. And so it's going to, depend on your maturity of business and things like that. But there are steps that you can take today that will set you up for large scale down the line. And they're way more foundational things that I think people need to think through before just, I want to move these 100 customers into scale. That's the goal, certainly. But I think that you should spend 3 to 6 months really prepping the foundation. It's just like building a house, right? You want to build a house on like a really solid foundation. Start there.
Yeah, exactly. I love that answer. I think that definitely answers that question. So there are a bunch more questions. Do you feel up for a rapid fire question round? Because there are a bunch, so we need to go fast, and I want to cover as many as possible. So starting at Dietrich, how would you tackle the customers in the CS pool that don't report data back to you?
How would you tackle the customers in the CS pool? How would you tackle? I'm sorry. I'm just trying to.
Yeah, maybe Dietrich, if you can clarify the question a little bit more, then we can actually pick it up.
Okay. So I think I understand.
Yeah, he did actually.
It is the. Let me know if I'm understanding this correctly. But Dietrich, if you're asking about like say on-premise customers that are not sending data back to us, so we have less visibility, that I'm going to go with that as the assumption. So let's say that. Okay. So Looker is a hybrid solution. We deploy on-premise and in the cloud. Now, for many customers that are on-premise, we also get information sent back to them or back to our servers. So long as we open a port, we're able to get all that information the same way as if we were hosting them in the cloud. We get that same level of data. We also work with banks and we work with government agencies. They flip that off. Now, those are the types of customers that if you're working in that on-prem environment, the key difference between the old world of on-prem and SaaS is that a lot of things are online. You can track those. You remove that and you almost need to go back to the old school account management days where like you were planting somebody at the government accountability office in DC to really work with them because otherwise you have no visibility. So it's a very difficult thing. I wish that we had better answers for it, but data is one of the key differentiators for SaaS. And without that, you're flying blind.
Yeah, exactly. Love that. Second question, do you have any advice on CS involvement in POCs, proof of concepts, or freemium subscription models?
Yeah, I think it needs to be very targeted and limited. If you're talking about freemium and you're talking about scale, I don't think there's a world in which a CSM is going to add a tremendous amount of value to move the needle on a $10.99 a month subscription for a Slack, starter account. It doesn't make sense. But if there are potentially, certain larger accounts that are, hey, we're trying to, use 1,000 seats and we're using the free model and we're trying to go to the premium, what does that look like? Sure, there could be some interesting investments that are done there. But like I said, it has to be hyper targeted. What is that CSM going to be doing? What is the value they're going to be adding? How is that going to be differentiated from the CE or the sales engineer and the account executive? What is the differentiator? So be crystal clear on that. And, then you can make sure that you build some sort of program around like an accelerator or something to deploy it very quickly and programmatically.
Yeah, agreed. Especially around the POC, I think it's super difficult for a CSM to actually get roped into a project like that because I think that's more of a sales thing, actually, because it sounds like the company's not ready to actually make a full commitment or purchase. So
and we do have accelerators that we've developed that are very targeted. So if a customer's not sure about what kind of support am I going to get after I close this deal, I need some help understanding that. Great, we've got a deck for that. So CSM will drop in, hey customer, I'm a CSM, I'm somebody, myself or my peers, we are going to be working with you. This is the type of post-sale support you're going to get. Here's all the digital channels you're going to be getting. And great, like customer now knows all they need to know about what their experience is going to be. That might be an instance in which this makes sense, but if it's not clearly defined, I'm not sure the value of a CSM in a proof of concept.
No, great. And then the final one, the top KPIs for your digital program.
Same as customer success, right? We've got GRR and dollar-based net retention and things like that. The benefit, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, is that each one of these digital channels themselves are kicking off data. So in email land, when you're doing email campaigns, it's going to be open rates and click-through rates and engagement rates and registration. For community, it's going to be number of users, number of active users. So you're looking at all these different digital channels. So while our key measures of success are GRR and NRR for the pool of customers, we're also looking at the efficacy of each of these digital channels with their own metrics. And so, that's how we're kind of working, both the more proactive leading indicators and then the reactive stuff that's more monetary.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. We are out of time.
Like I said, it always goes way too quickly.
It goes so fast. I know. So wait. First of all, thank you so much for taking another hour to actually speak to us and answer so many of these questions. I've actually heard a lot of new stuff that we didn't get to cover in the last webinar. So I'm super pleased with this. And I also hope that everyone that was here or still is here got from the webinar what they were expecting. If we missed any question or you didn't get to ask it, or you feel like we missed a major part of what we promised to deliver in the webinar, feel free to just reach out to me or Brian on LinkedIn. And I'm pretty sure we'll find a very creative way to actually get that content to you. But for now, thank you for being here. And Brian, thank you so much for actually taking the time. This has been awesome. I hope that in a year, we'll be getting another boatload of LinkedIn messages asking for Encore number 3.
Yeah, and just for everybody who's stuck along, here's maybe a little bit of an Easter egg. I'm sharing an article that came out in 2021 of last year. So if you're still on, check the chat. There's a URL to Harvard Business Review. It talks about customer journeys being way more customized in the post-pandemic world and the need for that. And it focuses on a B2C type example. But I feel like there's so much inspiration in there for B2B that allows us to be more like our B2C counterparts. I'd encourage everybody to take a look at that. It talks about behavior maps and how you drive customization for users and things. And it really leans in on some of the things that we discussed today. But yeah, thank you so much for everybody tuning in. I'm really grateful to be able to just spend some time with everybody.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that. It's an awesome article. All right. Thank you, everyone. And hopefully see you soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers.